The marble floor of the Boston Heights Social Club stretched like a frozen lake beneath Nora Harper's worn sneakers. $34. That was everything. $34 in a crumpled envelope in her pocket, and 3 days to turn it into $35,000, or the state would take Emma away. Emma stood beside her mother, 6 years old, wearing a pink jacket from a thrift store rack, her small fingers wrapped around something precious. Her grandmother's recipe book. The pages were yellowed, corners dog-eared, margins filled with handwriting that belonged to someone Nora had loved and lost. Emma didn't know why she'd brought it. She just knew it made her feel safe. The receptionist looked up from her desk, her nose wrinkling like she'd caught a bad smell. Her name tag read Victoria. She wore designer glasses on a thin chain. She did not smile. "May I help you?" Victoria's voice was sharp, a blade wrapped in ice. Nora stepped forward, trying to straighten her shoulders, trying to look like she belonged in a place where the lobby itself probably cost more than her entire apartment building. "I'm here to apply for a waitressing position," Nora said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "I saw the posting online. I have experience. I'm reliable. I can start immediately." Victoria's eyes moved from Nora's face down to her clothes. The examination took for seconds. For seconds of being measured and found insufficient. "Do you have membership?" Victoria asked. "No, but—" The revolving door moved. Wind from the street rushed in, carrying the smell of November and exhaust. 2 women entered with the kind of ease that came from belonging, their heels clicking against marble like a metronome of wealth. They wore coats that probably cost more than Nora's car. Behind them came a third woman, and when she turned her head, her eyes found Nora's across the lobby. Rachel Dawson stopped walking. She was 43 years old and looked 30, the kind of ageless that came from monthly treatments Nora would never afford. Her hair was blonde, styled in a way that suggested she visited the same salon every 3 weeks. Diamond earrings caught the light. A Cartier watch on her left wrist. On her right hand, an engagement ring that could have funded a college education. Rachel's mouth opened slowly into a smile that was not a smile. "I know you," Rachel said. Not to her friends. To Nora. "You're that maid from the Riverside building. You came on Thursdays. Or was it Wednesdays? The days blend together when you're just the help." Nora felt Emma's hand tighten around the recipe book. "I'm applying for a job," Nora said. She kept her voice level. She had learned long ago how to keep her voice level. Rachel laughed. It was a small, cutting sound. "You smell like poverty," Rachel said. "Look at you. Where did those shoes come from? A donation bin? And that sweater, is that acrylic?" She turned to her friends. They laughed with her, their laughter filling the lobby like poisoned gas. "This is a members-only establishment. We don't let homeless people wander in off the street looking for handouts. You need to leave. Now." Emma made a sound. Not quite a word. A small whimper of fear. Victoria picked up her phone. "I'm calling security." Nora felt the heat rising in her chest, a burning that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with desperation. She had 3 days. 3 days until the court hearing. 3 days until CPS took her daughter. She needed this job. She needed any job. She needed. "That won't be necessary." The voice came from across the lobby. Deep. Solid. Like an oath made in a language only certain men understood. Matteo Valenti sat in a corner booth, a burgundy leather seat facing the door, a position that allowed him to see everything and be seen by no one who mattered. He wore a black suit that cost more than Nora's monthly rent. The fabric was cashmere, the stitching Italian, the fit perfect in a way that suggested the suit had been made specifically for his body. His dark hair was swept back from his forehead, exposing sharp cheekbones and a scar that ran from his left eye to his jawline like a thin white blade. He was 47 years old. He looked like a man who had seen things that would destroy lesser men and survived them anyway. Beside him sat Rocco and Luca, both younger, both wearing suits that cost half as much, both with the kind of bearing that marked them as soldiers in whatever empire he controlled. They had been reading documents spread across the table, but now they looked up, following their boss's gaze to the woman and child standing in the lobby. Matteo set down his pen. He stood. The movement was unhurried, each motion deliberate, a man so certain of his place in the world that he did not need to rush. He walked across the marble floor. The click of his shoes was the only sound. Rachel Dawson turned, and Nora watched something happen to Rachel's face. The cruelty drained out of it. The smile became uncertain. She straightened her posture, tilted her head, tried to rearrange her entire presence into something that looked like respect instead of arrogance. "Mr. Valenti," Rachel said. "I wasn't aware you were here." Matteo did not look at her. His eyes were fixed on Nora. Storm-gray eyes, the color of an ocean before a hurricane. He looked at her the way someone might look at a painting they were trying to understand. Like she was a puzzle he hadn't solved. "This woman is applying for employment," Matteo said. His voice was quiet, but the quiet had weight. The quiet had teeth. "Tell me why that is a problem." "She's not a member," Victoria said. Her voice had changed. The sharpness was gone. Now she sounded afraid. "The policy." "I am aware of the policy," Matteo said. "I own the policy. I own this club. I own the building. I own the ground it stands on." He turned his head very slowly toward Victoria. Not an aggressive movement. Just a turn of the head. But Victoria shrank back in her chair. "You will process her application. You will do so immediately. And you will apologize to her and her daughter." Silence swallowed the room. The kind of silence that happens when the world realigns itself around a new center of gravity. Rachel Dawson's face had gone pale. She was calculating. Nora could see it happening. Rachel was trying to figure out how to survive this moment, how to extract herself, how to preserve her place in whatever social hierarchy she occupied. "I apologize," Victoria said. The words came out in a rush. Nora felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Felt the weight of Emma's hand in hers, small and trembling. Felt something happening that didn't make sense, a crack opening in the wall that had been pressing down on her life. Matteo looked back at Nora. For a moment, there was something in his eyes that looked almost like pain. Like he was seeing something in her that reminded him of something he had lost. "Take the job," he said. "Your daughter's coloring is good. She holds that book like it matters. That matters." Then he turned and walked back to his booth. Rocco and Luca exchanged a look. In 15 years of working for him, they had never seen him do something like this. They had never seen him notice someone. They had never seen him care. Nora stood in the lobby of the Boston Heights Social Club, holding her daughter's hand, and understood that she had just crossed a threshold she didn't understand. That her life, somehow, had just changed. That the man in the corner booth had just decided her fate, though she didn't know why, and didn't know what it would cost her. But what Nora did not know, what none of them knew, was that Matteo Valenti was watching her from across the room, and in his chest, something was waking up. Something cold and dangerous and long forgotten. Outside, the November wind pressed against the club's windows. Rain had started to fall. In 3 days, a snowstorm would trap her at his mountain lodge. In 4 days, a man named Douglas Hale would be closing in on the network that hunted her. In 5 days, Matteo Valenti would make a choice that would destroy his careful separation from the violent world of his father. But that was still to come. For now, there was only the moment. Only the marble floor. Only Emma clutching her grandmother's recipe book. Only Nora Harper finally catching a break. Only Matteo Valenti, sitting in a corner booth with documents about human trafficking networks spread across his table, watching a woman he had never met before and thinking about the father he had spent 20 years escaping. Now, let us go back. Let us go back 3 weeks, to the moment before the Boston Heights Social Club, before Matteo Valenti looked up from his documents, to when Nora Harper was still invisible. Let us go to the beginning. 3 weeks before the Boston Heights Social Club, before Matteo Valenti looked up from his documents, before anyone knew that a man named Douglas Hale was closing in on his network, Nora Harper woke up in the dark. The alarm on her phone glowed for 06 a.m. The basement studio apartment was cold, the kind of cold that seeped up through the concrete floor and settled in her bones. She did not move for 3 full seconds. In those 3 seconds, she did the calculation she did every morning. Rent due in 3 days. $35,000. Her wallet contained $34. The math did not change no matter how many times she counted it. She pushed back the thin blanket and her feet touched the linoleum floor. Cold. Everything was cold. The apartment was 12 by 14 feet. A twin bed shoved against one wall, a hot plate on a shelf, a plastic milk crate she used for a dresser. On the nightstand, her grandmother's recipe book sat beside a photograph, a man in a yellow construction vest, smiling, alive. That was 2 years ago. Before the accident. Before the insurance company said the death was not covered because of a paperwork technicality that meant he was independent, not an employee, so his family received nothing. Before Nora understood that invisible people stayed invisible even when they were drowning. She dressed in the dark. Black pants, black shirt, black socks. The uniform was hanging on the back of the door, waiting for her like a second skin. The kitchen area was really just a corner. She filled the kettle with water from the tap and waited. While it boiled, she opened the cabinet above the hot plate. 1 box of oatmeal. Half a loaf of bread in a plastic bag. A jar of peanut butter with maybe 2 inches left. She made a bowl of oatmeal with water instead of milk because milk was $4 a half gallon and she was rationing. The oatmeal tasted like cardboard and resignation. At 5:15 a.m., she woke Emma. The girl was 5 years old, small for her age, with her father's dark eyes and her mother's tendency to see the goodness in everything. She lay in a twin bed pushed against the opposite wall, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Nora sat on the edge of the mattress and touched her daughter's forehead gently. "Good morning, Mija. It is time to wake up." Emma opened her eyes slowly. "Is it school day?" "It is school day." "You are leaving." The question was small and simple, and it broke something inside Nora that had not yet broken. She had asked her own mother that question 30 years ago. She remembered the texture of her mother's hands. She had promised herself she would never make Emma ask. And yet here they were. "I am going to work. But Mrs. Chen will pick you up. She will give you lunch. I will come back at 6 o'clock. We will have dinner together." Emma nodded and rubbed her eyes with her fists. "Can we have eggs?" Eggs were 89 cents a dozen. She had bought them 3 days ago and they were almost gone, but she had planned to save the last 2 for the weekend. But Emma was asking, and Emma never asked for much anymore because she had learned not to. "Yes, Mija. We will have eggs." They ate breakfast together in the dark. Nora had learned to minimize electricity use, so she did not turn on the lights during the early morning hours. The streetlight outside the small basement window provided just enough glow to see by. They sat on the edge of Emma's bed and shared the bowl of oatmeal. Emma made a face but did not complain. She was learning her mother's language, the language of making do, of taking what you could get, of not wasting the energy of disappointment. At 6:53 a.m., Nora braided Emma's hair. Tight French braids, the kind that would stay for 2 days, so she would not have to do it again tonight when she was exhausted. She used to braid her daughter's hair with ribbons. Last week she had cut a strip from an old pillowcase and used that instead. "Mama, the colors are pretty." The pillowcase had been white with a pattern of small blue flowers. Nora looked at the strip in her daughter's dark hair. Blue flowers. A small, ordinary thing that her daughter found beautiful. "Yes, Mija. Colors for good days." They took the bus to Mrs. Chen's house, a small home 3 blocks away where Emma stayed before school. Mrs. Chen was 72 years old and lived alone. She had known Nora's family for 5 years. She did not charge money for watching Emma. She said watching the girl kept her young. But she had her limits, and this weekend Mrs. Chen had her sister visiting from New York. She could not watch Emma. The text had come through yesterday, "I am so sorry. I feel terrible." Nora had written back, "No problem. I will figure something out." But she had not figured something out. She had no backup plan. The daycare center cost $40 a day. The babysitter charged $35. Neither was possible. Which meant tomorrow when she reported to work, she would have to bring Emma with her. To the mountain lodge. To the place where nobody was supposed to see the maids, let alone children. At 7:08 a.m., Emma disappeared into the school building with her teacher, and Nora turned toward the bus that would take her north. The journey took 80 minutes. 2 buses, a transfer in downtown Boston, then the number 47 heading into the White Mountains. Nora sat by the window and watched the city transform into forest. Buildings became trees. Concrete became sky. The November air pressed against the glass, heavy with the promise of snow. The lodge sat on 20 acres of private land, 2 hours north of the city. Matteo Valenti owned it through a shell corporation that nobody was supposed to know about. It was not a place business was done. It was a place power went to rest and think. Nora arrived at 8:45 a.m. She used her key card to enter through the service entrance and climbed the narrow stairs to the main floor. The lodge was immense, cathedral ceilings, stone fireplaces, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the snow-covered peaks of the mountains. The furniture was leather and mahogany. Oil paintings of seascapes hung on the walls. A piano sat in one corner, untouched, beautiful, worth more than everything Nora owned combined. Mrs. Brennan, the head housekeeper, was waiting with a list. "You missed the baseboards in the master hallway yesterday. Do them again today. And the sitting room needs the furniture moved. Dust beneath everything. Top to bottom." Mrs. Brennan was 63 years old and had been at the lodge for 12 years. She had never learned Nora's name. She called her you and pointed at tasks like she was training a dog. "Yes, I will do them now," Nora said. She changed into her uniform in the employee locker room, black slacks, black shirt with the lodge's insignia stitched on the chest, white apron, black shoes. She pulled her hair back into a low bun. She looked in the mirror and saw nothing. A ghost in a uniform. Good. This was the point. To be visible enough to do the work but invisible enough not to be noticed. The baseboards took 3 hours. She knelt with a cloth and a small brush, working the wood along the entire master hallway. Her knees ached. Her lower back screamed. She did not stop. There was a family to feed. There was an eviction notice sitting on the nightstand. There was the fact that in 3 days, if she did not produce $35,000 that she did not have and could never have, her daughter would be taken from her by the state. At 11:33 a.m., Matteo Valenti arrived. She heard the sound first, the gravel crunching under heavy tires, the low rumble of engines cutting off. She was working on the baseboards near the main staircase, and she heard footsteps and voices. Male voices, calm and practiced, the kind of voices that belong to men who made important decisions. "The papers are in the office. Rocco is handling the logistics. By next week, we will know everything," one voice said. It was deep and even, the kind of voice that could say something devastating without raising in pitch. That was Matteo Valenti. She had been working at the lodge for 4 months and had never spoken to him directly. She had heard his voice. She had seen him pass through rooms. But they did not exist in the same space. She was the help. He was the man the help served. The footsteps grew closer. She pressed herself against the wall, her body flattening like she could absorb herself into the stone. 2 men in expensive suits walked past her. The first was tall, mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair and eyes like winter sky. That was Matteo Valenti. The second was younger, mid-30s, with a scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone. His name was Rocco. He was always with Matteo. Rocco was on his phone as they walked. Yes. The shipment arrives Thursday at the port. We need the trucks ready by midnight. And check on the 3 women Douglas has flagged. I want to know if they are still in the territory. He paused. No, do not contact them yet. Just watch. Matteo wants to be sure before we move. Nora heard the words. Shipment. Territory. Douglas. Watch. They meant nothing to her, and she understood that this was intentional. She was not supposed to understand. She was not supposed to hear. She was not supposed to exist in this space where important men discussed important things. Matteo Valenti's eyes passed over her for a fraction of a second. They did not stop. He did not slow. He did not see her. She was a shadow in a black uniform, a ghost that maintained the space where he lived. They disappeared up the stairs to his office. Nora exhaled. She had not realized she was holding her breath. At 1:38 p.m., she took her 30-minute lunch break in the employee break room. She sat alone at a plastic table and ate the sandwich she had made that morning, 2 pieces of bread with 2 tablespoons of peanut butter from her jar at home. She had packed it in her work bag that morning, the same way she packed Emma's lunch, measured and portioned and designed to last. She pulled out her phone to check in with Mrs. Chen. Emma had made it to school. Everything was fine. 3 hours until pickup. Then her phone buzzed again. A different message. Mrs. Chen, I am so sorry. My sister just called. She is arriving tomorrow instead of this weekend. I cannot watch Emma tomorrow. I am truly sorry. The word swam in front of Nora's eyes. Could not watch Emma tomorrow. The day after tomorrow was Saturday. The blizzard was forecast for Saturday evening into Sunday. The storm warnings had been all over the news. Severe. Unprecedented. Roads would close. Travel would be impossible. Which meant she would have to bring Emma to work. She would have to bring her daughter to the lodge where she was supposed to be invisible, where even her presence as a maid was barely tolerated, where a 5-year-old child would be completely out of place. She typed back, "Thank you for letting me know. Do not worry. I will figure something out." She did not have something figured out. She had $34 in her wallet. She had a daughter with nowhere to go. She had a storm coming. She had 3 days to produce money that did not exist. The afternoon stretched long and cold. Nora moved through the lodge like a spirit, dusting furniture, replacing flowers, scrubbing surfaces that would never be clean enough. The wind outside had started to pick up. Through the tall windows, she could see the trees beginning to sway. The first wisps of cloud were moving in from the west. The forecast had said the storm would arrive Saturday evening. It was Friday. The wind hit like a blade wrapped in ice. One moment the supply van was moving through the mountain pass with Nora in the passenger seat, clipboard in hand, inventory list in her pocket. The next moment, the radio crackled. The dispatcher's voice, tight and urgent, all vehicles returned to base immediately. Storm accelerating. Roads closing in 20 minutes. The driver, a man named Curtis who had worked at the lodge for 8 years, gripped the steering wheel. His knuckles went white. He did not speak. He just turned the van around and pressed the accelerator. Nora's stomach dropped like a stone into black water. She had left Emma in the kitchen pantry of the lodge, hidden between the flour bins and the industrial cans of tomato sauce, clutching the grandmother's recipe book like it was the last real thing in the world. Nora had whispered to her, "Stay right here, baby. Stay quiet. Mommy will be back in 2 hours. No more. 2 hours and we go home together." Emma had nodded, her 6-year-old face serious and brave in the fluorescent light, and Nora had hated herself for leaving her there, hated herself for the choice that was not a choice at all. Mrs. Chen could not watch her. The blizzard was coming. There was nowhere else to go. The van pulled into the service garage at the lodge at 4:48 in the afternoon. Curtis killed the engine. Through the windshield, the sky was already the color of a bruise. The trees that ringed the property swayed in the rising wind, and the snow was beginning, not falling, but moving sideways, driven horizontal by gusts that made the van rock on its suspension. Nora climbed out, her maid's uniform under a thin jacket that would be useless. Curtis was already moving toward the staff entrance, his body angled against the wind. She started after him, then stopped. Her car was parked in the employee lot 3 blocks away. Her phone had died that morning, the battery was almost gone, the charger at home on her kitchen table. Her coat, the good winter coat she had bought 3 years ago from a thrift store for $17, hung in her locker in the staff room. She had $34 in her wallet. The lodge manager's voice crackled over the intercom speakers mounted on the exterior walls. All personnel must evacuate immediately. All personnel. Repeat, roads closing. Depart now. No exceptions. Around her, staff emerged from the building in 1s and 2s. The groundskeeper. 2 kitchen assistants. The front desk clerk. They moved with purpose, heads down, walking toward the parking lot where 3 vehicles waited with engines running. Curtis was already in the lead vehicle. The doors slammed. The engines roared. Within minutes, the property was empty except for the howling wind and the spreading darkness and the snow that was beginning to pile against the walls of the lodge like an invading army. Nora stood alone in the service courtyard. Her phone was dead. She had no way to call anyone. No way to reach Mrs. Chen. No way to contact Matteo Valenti or anyone else in the lodge because she was nobody, just the invisible maid who cleaned bathrooms and restocked linens, and nobody important enough to matter in a crisis. The thought came to her like a knife: Emma is inside. Emma is alone inside. She moved. The service entrance was locked, but Nora worked here. She knew where Curtis hid the backup key, a silver thing taped to the underside of the outdoor electrical box. Her fingers were already shaking as she peeled it free and shoved it into the lock. The door swung inward, and she stepped into the warmth of the lodge's interior, into the humming silence of the heating system, into the place where her daughter was hiding in the pantry, growing colder and more frightened with every passing second. The kitchen was on the ground floor, 3 corridors and 2 staircases away. Nora ran. Her footsteps echoed on the polished stone floors. The lodge around her was a cathedral of silence and shadows. All the guests departed, all the staff vanished, just empty rooms and expensive furniture and the wind pressing against the windows like something alive and hungry. She rounded a corner near the dining room. The kitchen door was ahead. But when she reached it and pushed through, the pantry was empty. The flour bins were undisturbed. The recipe book was gone. Emma was gone. Nora's heart stopped. She stood in the doorway, breathing in short, sharp gasps, her mind fragmenting. Gone where? Emma wouldn't leave. Emma was obedient, careful, a child who understood consequences in a way no 6-year-old should. She would not abandon the pantry. She would not wander. Unless someone had found her. Unless someone had. Emma. Nora's voice came out shattered. She moved deeper into the kitchen, past the stainless steel counters and the massive refrigerators, her eyes searching every shadow. Emma, baby, where are you? Nothing answered but the wind, which was now loud enough to be heard inside the lodge, a steady roar that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then they steadied, but something had shifted. Nora could feel it in her chest, a cold knot of terror that was no longer just about money or homelessness or the impossible 3-day deadline. It was about her daughter. It was about being trapped in a massive, isolated building during a storm that was moving in like the lid of a coffin being sealed, and having no idea where Emma was or who had taken her or why. She moved to the windows above the kitchen sink and looked out into the blizzard. The visibility was near zero. Snow plastered the glass in thick, wet sheets. The wind screamed through the gaps in the window frames, a sound like a living thing in agony. The driveway where the vans had been parked was already hidden under 6 inches of accumulation, and it was still falling, still swirling, still erasing the world beyond the lodge's walls one moment at a time. No one was leaving tonight. No help was coming. Footsteps approached from somewhere deeper in the lodge. Slow. Deliberate. The kind of footsteps that belonged to someone moving through his own territory, unrushed, certain. Nora turned from the window just as the kitchen door opened. Matteo Valenti stood in the doorway. He was 6'2" and built like the kind of man who did not lose arguments. His tailored charcoal suit cost more than everything Nora owned, the jacket open over a white shirt that showed the base of his throat, where a thin gold chain caught the light. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, and his eyes were the color of a storm, penetrating and cold and somehow aware of every weakness you carried inside yourself. A thin scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, pale white against his olive skin, and on his wrist was a watch that glinted like liquid silver. But it was not Matteo who made Nora's breath catch. It was Emma. His daughter was in his arms, wrapped in a sweater that belonged to someone in the house, her small face nestled against his chest. She was holding the recipe book against her stomach, and her lips were no longer blue, and she was not crying. She was looking at the man holding her with an expression of absolute trust, as if he had appeared in the pantry like a guardian angel and lifted her out of the darkness and into safety without asking permission or demanding explanations. Behind Matteo, 2 men in dark suits stood like sentries, their faces carefully blank. She was crying. Matteo's voice came out deep and solid like an oath, measured, each word placed with precision. In the pantry. I heard her from upstairs. Nora could not move. She could not speak. She could only stare at her daughter, still alive, still safe, cradled in the arms of a man who had no reason to care about the invisible maid or her invisible child. The staff has evacuated. Matteo continued, stepping fully into the kitchen. The roads are closing. The temperature is dropping below freezing. He paused, and his eyes met Nora's with the force of a punch. You're trapped here now. You and your daughter. Which means you'll stay with me until the storm passes. It was not a question. The wind screamed against the windows, and somewhere in the vast, isolated lodge, the heating system hummed, and Emma reached out one small hand and pointed at Nora, her voice trembling but clear. Mommy, he kept me warm. Rocco, the older lieutenant with the scar running across his left eyebrow, exchanged a glance with Luca, the younger one with the tattoo of a lion climbing his neck. In 15 years of working for Matteo Valenti, neither man had ever seen him cradle a child. Neither man had ever heard gentleness in his voice. Neither man had ever witnessed the kind of thing happening now, their boss, moving with careful deliberation, walking toward the fireplace in his private wing with a stranger's daughter in his arms, his movement steady and protective in a way that made something shift in the very air around them. Luca leaned toward Rocco and whispered, "What changed?" Rocco shook his head, his jaw tight. He did not know. Neither of them knew. They only knew that the world had just tilted on its axis, and when it settled again, nothing would be the same. 300 miles away, in a private booth at an upscale steakhouse in downtown Boston, Douglas Hale smiled as his phone buzzed. He read the message and nodded once. The maid was confirmed. Location, the Valenti Lodge, north of the city, isolated, about to be cut off by a blizzard. Vulnerable. Alone. Perfect. He looked across the table at Rachel Dawson, whose face was flushed with vindictive satisfaction, and he said quietly, "She'll be gone within 48 hours." Rachel raised her wine glass. "To invisible women," she said. "Nobody misses them when they disappear." Outside the steakhouse, the snow was falling faster now, and on the mountains where the lodge stood, the storm was becoming a wall of white that would seal off the world and make rescue impossible and leave Nora Harper trapped with a man whose protection might be her salvation or her damnation, and neither of them yet understood that everything, every terrible, beautiful, impossible thing that was about to happen, hinged on a choice made in the darkness of a pantry between flour bins and industrial cans and the desperate hope of a mother who had nothing left to lose but her daughter's life. The wind howled. The temperature dropped. And inside the lodge, as Emma's small face pressed against the cold window and she watched the snow fall like the world was ending, Matteo Valenti made a decision that would eventually bring down an empire of cruelty and human suffering. He decided to protect them. He decided that no one, not in his house, not under his watch, would ever be treated as invisible again. The rain fell like broken glass against her skin, and Nora Harper stood on the concrete steps outside her apartment building with her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold her phone. Midnight had passed 3 hours ago. She had 12 hours left. 12 hours to find $35,000 or watch the state take Emma away at dawn. The eviction notice was still taped to the door upstairs, the paper curled and water-stained, the deadline printed in black letters that felt like a death sentence. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the envelope Matteo had slipped inside before she left the lodge. $5,000 in $100 bills, arranged with such careful precision that she knew he had placed them there himself, his hands that gave orders to empires taking time to fold currency for a woman he barely knew. Not enough. She counted the bills twice. 5,000. She needed 35,000. The mathematics were impossible, the gap between what she had and what she needed stretching like an ocean she could never cross. Nora looked up at the window of her apartment on the 3rd floor. Emma was with Mrs. Chen, the elderly neighbor who had watched her while Nora worked the cleaning shifts at the lodge. Through the rain, she could see the glow of the television, could almost imagine Emma curled under the worn quilt, her small body finally warm and safe. For 3 days, Emma had been warm. For 3 days, her daughter had slept without hunger, had eaten real food at a real table, had sat by a fireplace while a man who controlled empires had braided her hair and listened to her stories about the color she loved and the things that made her afraid. And now Nora was going to take that away. She sat down on the wet concrete steps, rain soaking through her coat, the fabric that never quite dried anymore, the fabric that smelled like mildew and desperation. Her fingers were numb. Her entire body had gone numb. She thought about what Mrs. Chen had said that morning, her voice gentle but honest. Maybe there are other options, Nora. Maybe you need to think about what's best for Emma, not what's best for you. Maybe Emma would be better off without me. The thought arrived fully formed, like a poison she had been carrying in her bloodstream for months. Maybe I am the problem. Maybe I should just walk away. Let the state take her to a good family, a real family, people with money and homes and the ability to buy her things. People who wouldn't sit on cold steps in the rain counting money they didn't have. Nora closed her eyes. The rain fell harder. Her shoulders curved inward, her body folding into itself like a broken thing. She had failed. After everything, after the abuse, after running, after working until her hands bled and her back screamed and her mind splintered into pieces, she had still failed. The one thing she was supposed to do was protect her daughter, and she was about to lose her. Then Emma's face flashed in her mind. Not Emma the way she had been yesterday, warm and safe. But Emma from weeks ago, Emma with hunger in her eyes, Emma asking in that small voice, "Mama, why don't we have a house like other people?" Emma pressing her face against the cold window at the lodge and whispering, "This is the most beautiful place I ever seen." Emma reaching up with her small hand to touch Nora's tear-stained cheek and saying with absolute certainty, "I love you, Mama. I will always love you." Nora opened her eyes. The rain was still falling. The cold was still there. The mathematics of her debt were still impossible. But something inside her chest, something that had almost shattered, hardened back into place. She would not give up. She would not walk away. She had nothing left, yes. She had no collateral, no credit, no way to borrow the remaining $30,000. But she was still standing. Emma was still upstairs, still alive, still hers. She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. She would call Matteo. He had offered help once. He had said she was not alone anymore. She didn't know what she would ask him to do, didn't know if asking would destroy the fragile thing between them, but Emma was worth the risk. Emma was worth anything. Nora had barely unlocked her phone when the black van pulled up to the curb. The vehicle was unmarked except for the tinted windows that reflected nothing back but darkness. The engine died. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the side door opened and a man stepped out into the rain. He was tall, perhaps 60, his face carved from something harder than flesh, his suit expensive but worn in a way that suggested he spent more time in warehouses than boardrooms. Douglas Hale. She did not know his name yet, but she recognized the danger in the way he moved, the casual predation in the smile he offered as he approached her on the steps. Nora Harper? His voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of someone who had made many offers to desperate women and knew the exact tone that made refusal seem impossible. She stood. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs felt weak, unreliable. Yes? I'm Douglas Hale. Rachel Dawson is a friend of mine. She mentioned you were looking for work. He climbed the first step. His two companions remained by the van, their bodies angled in a way that suggested they knew how to move fast. Very well-paid work. Nora backed away, her foot catching on the edge of a step. I'm not interested. I think you are. Douglas climbed another step, closing the distance between them. I know about your situation, Nora. $35,000. 3 days. A custody hearing that will take your daughter away. He paused, letting the weight of his knowledge settle over her like snow. I can make that go away. How do you? Rachel tells me everything. She's very good at identifying opportunities. His smile widened. Come with me. We'll discuss terms. I think you'll find them very reasonable. The coldness in his eyes was something she recognized from her years with Emma's father, that particular emptiness that meant a person had stopped seeing her as human. This man saw her as a problem to solve, a commodity with a price. She saw the outline of this transaction in her mind, the jobs he was offering, the kind of work that left bruises in places no one looked, the kind of work that made women disappear. She ran. Her feet slipped on the rain-slicked concrete, but momentum carried her forward, down the steps, onto the sidewalk, her screams tearing out of her throat before she could stop them. Behind her, Douglas shouted something to his men. Footsteps. Heavy. Fast. She ran toward the street, her lungs burning, her legs pumping despite their weakness. She screamed again, louder, hoping someone would hear, hoping someone would care that a woman was running for her life at 3 in the morning in Boston. Then a black SUV screeched to a halt directly in her path. For one moment she thought it was over, that Douglas's men had another vehicle, that she had run directly toward her own capture. The passenger door opened. Luca stepped out, his face hard, his body moving with the precision of someone trained for violence. Behind him came Rocco, broader than Luca, scarred across the knuckles, his eyes scanning the street with the calm of a man who had seen blood before. Inside, Luca said. Not a question. A command. Douglas's 2 men were 15 feet away, closing fast. Nora didn't hesitate. She moved toward the SUV, and Luca grabbed her arm, not roughly, but with the kind of grip that said, you are mine now, you are safe now, you are protected by the only power that matters in this city. He pulled her into the back seat. The door slammed. The SUV accelerated. In the street behind them, Rocco had already moved. He caught the first of Douglas's men by the collar, slammed him against the brick wall of an adjacent building so hard that the impact echoed through the empty street. The second man hesitated, assessed the situation, turned, and ran. Rocco didn't follow. He just stood there in the rain, his fist unclenching, his eyes returning to the SUV where Nora was gasping for breath in the darkness. Douglas Hale watched from the curb as the black vehicle disappeared into the rain-soaked Boston night. His face remained serene, but something cold and calculating shifted behind his eyes. He had underestimated the Valenti connection. He had believed the maid was unprotected, invisible, easy. He had been wrong about one thing, but he was right about another. She was still vulnerable. She still needed money. She still had a daughter. And there were more ways to hunt than rushing forward with violence. He smiled and turned back toward his van. Meanwhile, 300 miles north, the blizzard at the mountain lodge was breaking. The wind had shifted. The snow was thinning. The roads would open by morning. Matteo Valenti stood in his study, looking at the snow-covered landscape, when Luca's call came through. "Boss, they tried to take her." Luca's voice was steady, but underneath was something urgent, something that suggested Matteo's quiet world was about to shatter. "We got there in time. She's safe. But you need to know who tried." Matteo listened as Luca described the man, the van, the operation. His face did not change. His hands did not clench. But his lieutenants, standing in the adjoining room, saw the shift in the air around him, the quality of silence that preceded violence. "Where is she?" Matteo asked. "Rocco is taking her to the safe house on Tremorne. She's frightened. She keeps asking if you're angry with her, as if this is her fault." Matteo ended the call. He looked out at the breaking storm, at the landscape that was becoming visible again as the white began to clear. He had allowed himself 3 days with her. 3 days of watching her daughter sleep by a fire, 3 days of pretending he was a man who could have gentle things. 3 days of lying to himself about what he wanted. The storm was ending. The roads were opening. And now someone was going to teach him the true cost of that softness. He made 3 calls. Within the first hour, the machinery of his empire began to move. By dawn, 12 men in black were moving through Boston like ghosts, coordinating with federal agent Sarah Mendez, who had been Matteo's silent partner in dismantling trafficking networks for the past 2 years. The FBI had files on Douglas Hale. The FBI had wanted him for months. They had simply been waiting for leverage, for a moment when an arrest would hold, when evidence would stick. Matteo had just given them both. The raid began at 6 in the morning. Douglas Hale's warehouse on the waterfront exploded into chaos. Flash grenades turned day into night and night into white fire. Men shouted. Glass shattered like ice. Douglas ran toward the back exit, his body moving with the desperation of someone who understood that this moment was the fulcrum on which everything balanced. Rocco caught him before he made 10 feet. The impact sent Douglas sprawling, his body slamming against concrete so hard that the breath left his lungs. When Rocco hauled him up, his nose was bleeding, his left eye already swelling shut. Rocco threw him into the center of the warehouse, into the light of the tactical lamps, into the presence of the man he had underestimated. Matteo Valenti stood 8 feet away, his black coat unbuttoned, his hands relaxed at his sides, his expression carrying the weight of centuries of Sicilian justice. Behind him stood 12 men whose loyalty was absolute. Around the warehouse, FBI agents moved in precise patterns, their weapons lowered but their attention focused. Douglas collapsed onto his knees. His body began to tremble. When he spoke, his voice came out like a broken thing. "Please. I'll tell you everything. I'll give you names, locations, everything. Please." Matteo stepped forward. When he spoke, his voice was like thunder rolling across a dark sky. "You prey on the desperate. You take mothers from their children. You hunt women as if they are animals." He paused. "You made a mistake. You should have stayed invisible. You should have disappeared into the city and never contacted her again. Instead, you came to her door." Agent Mendez stepped forward with handcuffs. She was a woman in her 50s with a face that had seen too much darkness but refused to break under its weight. Her partner, Agent Chen, was already moving through the warehouse, cataloging evidence, photographing locations where trafficking victims had been held. "Douglas Hale," Mendez said, her voice formal and absolute, "you are under arrest for human trafficking, kidnapping, racketeering, conspiracy, and terrorism charges. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Douglas tried to bargain. He always did. "I have money. I can pay. I can." Matteo leaned down until his face was level with Douglas's. When he spoke, his words were enunciated with the precision of a man pronouncing a sentence. Prison is better than what I would do to you. Too quick, too easy, too merciful. Death would be a kindness. Instead, you rot. 40 years in a cell. No parole. No forgiveness. Just time stretching behind you like a grave that never ends. The men dragged Douglas out. The warehouse grew quiet. Only the sound of federal agents moving, cataloging, building the case that would put Douglas Hale away for the rest of his life. But there was one more loose end. Rachel Dawson was at the Boston Heights Social Club, where she had been every Thursday for the past 12 years. The ballroom was filled with the old money of the city, the inherited wealth that had built Boston's bones, the people who believed themselves untouchable because their families had always been untouched. Agent Mendez entered at 8 o'clock in the evening, her FBI jacket visible, her purpose clear. She moved through the ballroom with the certainty of a woman enforcing law in a space built on lawlessness. Every head turned as she approached the table where Rachel Dawson was finishing her second martini. Rachel Dawson. Mendez held out a warrant. You're under arrest as an accomplice to human trafficking, conspiracy, and racketeering. Rachel's face went white. Around her, the women who had been her friends for decades began to back away, their bodies angling toward exits, their faces already beginning to erase her. Rachel stood, her voice climbing into panic. This is absurd. This is a terrible mistake. I don't know what you're talking about. We have your communications with Douglas Hale, Mendez said, her voice carrying across the ballroom. You provided him with targets. Vulnerable women. Their names, addresses, financial situations. You identified victims so they could be approached, recruited, exploited. That's not true, Rachel said, but her voice had lost its certainty. Mendez cuffed her wrists. Cameras flashed. The society women of Boston who had laughed with Rachel while she destroyed Nora Harper began to photograph the moment, their phones out, their social media accounts already composing the narrative of Rachel Dawson's fall. Everything you said was a lie, one woman whispered to another. She destroyed people. She helped them be destroyed. Rachel was led out, screaming denials that no one believed anymore. By the evening news, her mugshot was on every channel. By midnight, her social standing had become a ruin. By morning, she was simply gone, erased from society in the same way she had helped erase vulnerable women. The justice system moved with the precision of machinery. Douglas Hale received 40 years in federal prison. No parole. No possibility of release before death claimed him. Rachel Dawson received 20 years, along with a financial ruin that saw her mansion seized, her bank accounts frozen, her legacy destroyed. They had hunted invisible women. Now they themselves became invisible, locked away in cells and social exile, forgotten by the world that had once celebrated them. Somewhere in Boston, in a safe house on Tremont Street, Nora Harper finally stopped trembling. The morning light filtered through the safe house windows in pale, trembling rays. Nora Harper sat on the edge of a bed that was not hers, in a room that smelled like cleaning chemicals and institutional silence, and she did not move. Her hands lay flat against her thighs. Her breathing came in shallow pools. Emma slept 3 rooms away, finally deep in the kind of sleep that does not jolt awake at every sound, and Nora could not bring herself to move from this spot because moving meant accepting that the night had actually happened, that Rachel Dawson was gone, that Douglas Hale was in a cell, that the terror that had lived in her chest for 117 days had finally stopped clawing at her throat. A knock came. Precise. Professional. The kind of knock that announces itself without aggression. Agent Mendez stood in the doorway, her badge catching the morning light, her face arranged in the expression of someone who had delivered both good news and devastation in equal measure across her career. You're safe, she said. Both of you. Douglas Hale's network is being dismantled as we speak. 17 other women have been recovered from locations across 3 states. They're being placed in protected housing. You were brave, Ms. Harper. What you did, going to the authorities, testifying, documenting everything. You saved lives. Nora nodded. The words landed somewhere outside herself, like rain hitting a window from the other side of the glass. There's a secure phone in the kitchen if you need to contact anyone, Mendez continued. You'll remain here for another week minimum. After that, we'll transition you to long-term housing. There are programs available to help you establish new documentation, new identity markers if you're concerned about. My daughter, Nora said. Her voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Emma. She's 5. She doesn't understand any of this. We have counselors trained in childhood trauma, Mendez said. I'll have them contact you today. The agent withdrew, and Nora sat alone again with the sound of the city moving beyond the reinforced windows. Somewhere down there, Boston was going about its morning. People were drinking coffee, making phone calls, living in a world that had not been broken open and reassembled in the span of 3 days. The front door opened. Heavy footsteps. A cadence she recognized. Matteo Valenti filled the doorway in a charcoal suit that had been tailored to perfection, his dark hair swept back from his face, his jaw shadowed with the kind of stubble that comes from not sleeping. Behind him stood Rocco and Luca, their bulk nearly blocking the hallway. When Matteo's eyes found Nora, something shifted in his expression, a softening at the edges that his men had only witnessed once or twice in 15 years of working for him, and never directed at anyone outside his inner circle. You're all right, he said. Not a question. Yes. We are. Emma is sleeping. Matteo nodded. He was holding an envelope, cream-colored, expensive, the kind of envelope that contained documents or photographs or. He crossed the room and placed it in her hands. Open it, he said. Inside was a cashier's check. The amount written in the box was $35,000. Nora's hands began to shake. I can't. Matteo, I can't accept this. You've already done so much, you saved us, You think this is charity, he said. His voice carried the weight of something definite. It is not. You earned it. Every moment you fought for your daughter instead of breaking. Every time you refused to disappear into the silence. Every choice you made to survive instead of surrender. That is worth $35,000. That is worth more. You were brave. You survived. You saved other women. This is not a loan. This is not something you will repay me for in servitude or debt. This is the price of your courage. Nora looked at the check and then at his face, and something inside her that had been locked in a fist for months finally unclenched. The tears came without warning, without dignity, a breaking open that she could not control. She folded forward, the check still clutched in her hands, and she wept, not from sadness now, but from the sheer weight of relief, of survival, of being seen after so long being invisible. Matteo did not move to comfort her. He stood present in her grief the way some people do, not with words or touch, but simply by remaining, by witnessing, by not looking away. The sound of small feet came from the hallway. Emma appeared in her pajamas, her hair tangled from sleep, her eyes wide with the confusion of waking in a strange place. She looked at Matteo, and something in her child's instinct recognized him as the person who had held her while the world fell apart. She walked forward and wrapped her arms around his leg, her small hands not quite reaching around his thigh. For a moment, Matteo stood absolutely still. This man who had built an empire on the principle of never being vulnerable, never being touched, never allowing anyone close enough to matter, he froze. Then, with the careful precision of someone handling something precious and fragile, he placed his hand on Emma's head and gently stroked her hair. Rocco and Luca exchanged a glance. In 15 years, they had never seen this. I have a proposition for you, Matteo said, his voice steady even as his hand remained on Emma's head. I'm opening a new restaurant chain across Boston. 8 locations. I need someone to manage operations, inventory, staff scheduling, quality control. It pays $80,000 a year with benefits, healthcare, a retirement plan. You would report directly to me. You would build something legitimate. You would have a future. Nora looked up at him through her tears. You don't owe me a job. No, Matteo said. I owe you a chance. This is that chance. You can accept it or refuse it. But you should know, in 15 years, I have never offered anyone this position. I do not trust easily. But I trust you. Nora reached out and took his hand. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll take it. Emma's small voice came from below. Does this mean we stay? Matteo looked down at the child. Yes, Emma. You stay. The safe house held that moment, the three of them connected across the space of grief and rescue and the beginning of something neither of them had dared imagine a week earlier. 1 year passed in the turning of seasons. The winter that had nearly killed them gave way to spring, then summer, then an autumn where Boston's leaves turned colors like fire and copper and old gold. Nora moved through her days with the kind of purpose that had seemed impossible when she was counting coins to buy bread. She managed for restaurant locations. She hired staff carefully, trained them with patience, built a workplace where people wanted to stay because they felt seen. Emma was in first grade now, with a backpack and a teacher who knew her name and friends who came to birthday parties. They lived in a modest penthouse apartment that Nora rented with her own salary, not owned, but rented, because ownership meant staying in one place, and Nora was learning that security did not require permanence. The evening came when she stood on the balcony of that apartment, watching the Boston skyline darken into dusk. The city lights began their slow emergence, each window becoming a small gold eye in the darkness. She wore a black dress that she had chosen herself, her hair styled the way she wanted it, her nails professionally done. She was 30 years old and for the first time in her life, she looked like a person who believed she deserved to take up space in the world. Behind her, footsteps crossed the living room. She heard the soft press of shoes against the hardwood floor before she turned. Matteo stood in the doorway of the balcony, silhouetted against the apartment's interior light. He wore a charcoal suit with a white shirt open at the collar, and his expression held something she had not seen in him before, something tentative, almost vulnerable, like a man about to cross a bridge he was not certain would hold his weight. "I've been looking for you," he said. "I sent you my address," Nora replied, her voice carrying a smile. "I know." He stepped onto the balcony, leaving a distance of several feet between them. "I waited. I needed to make sure you were standing on your own first. I needed to know that if I asked you to stay with me, you would be choosing it, not escaping into it." The city hummed below them, traffic, distant sirens, the sound of 8 million people living their individual lives. "Why did you help me?" Nora asked. "Really? Not because I was useful. Not because of Emma. Why?" Matteo looked out at the skyline for a long time before answering. "When I was a child," he said, "my mother was terrified. Every single day. My father beat her. We had nothing, not even hope that things would change. She worked 3 jobs and came home bruised and silent. One night, she didn't wake up. The doctors said her heart simply stopped. She was 41 years old." He paused, and the only sound was the wind moving between the buildings. "I swore to myself that when I got power, when I had enough money and enough men and enough influence to matter, I would use it differently than my father used his. I would protect people instead of destroying them. But I spent 20 years building an empire, and I never actually tried. Until I saw you and Emma in that kitchen, shivering and terrified, and I saw my mother looking back at me from her eyes." Nora stepped closer. "You saved us." "You saved yourself," Matteo said, and when he turned to face her, there was something breaking open in his expression. "I opened a door. You walked through it. You fought. You testified. You gave 17 women their lives back. You did that. Not me." "I don't know how to thank you," Nora whispered. "You already have." He moved closer, and now there was only a hand's breadth of distance between them. "You gave me something I thought I'd lost. Hope. That someone like me, someone who built his life in violence and darkness, could do something good. That the blood in my veins doesn't have to define everything I touch. You're not your father, Nora said. I know, he replied. Because of you. He reached for her hand. His palm was warm, his grip careful, as if he was still learning how to touch someone without the intention of harm. Their fingers interlaced, and the gesture felt like a language they had not known they shared. I carried something for a year, Matteo said, his voice dropping lower. The truth is, I didn't help you because of obligation or redemption or any noble reason. I helped you because when I saw you fight for your daughter with nothing but $34 and 3 days and no way out, I saw the kind of strength I want in my life. Not beside me. In my life. If you would have me. Nora's breath caught. The city lights blurred behind him. I'm not asking for anything tonight, Matteo continued. I just needed you to know. Nora reached for his other hand, bringing both of his palms to rest against her chest, right over her heart. I know, she said. I've known for months. They stood like that, two people who had learned the hard way that survival matters more than pride, connected in the darkness while the city moved beneath them, oblivious to the small miracle of connection happening on a balcony in downtown Boston. Time moved forward. Seasons turned again. Nora stood in her apartment one quiet evening, her grandmother's recipe book open on the kitchen counter. The margins were filled with her grandmother's handwriting, notes about which spice to add when sorrow came, which ingredient to double when hope returned. On the last page, written in fading ink, the storm will pass and you are far stronger than you think. Emma slept peacefully in the next room, her nightlight casting soft shadows on the hallway walls. Her school photographs lined the refrigerator, a child who was learning to smile genuinely, who was learning that safety could last, that adults could be trusted. Nora's phone buzzed. A text from Matteo, dinner tomorrow? She replied, yes. And somewhere in the architecture of her chest, in the place where terror had lived, there was now room for something quieter, steadier, truer. Not happiness exactly. But peace. The kind of peace that comes after surviving, after fighting, after learning that you are made of stronger material than you ever imagined. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe so you never miss a story that reminds you what real strength looks like. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done in Nora's position. More stories like this are coming tomorrow, and we can't wait to share them with you. Remember, you are stronger than you think. No matter how hard life gets, after the rain, the sky clears. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.